Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Leicester. My name is Mary-Ann Lund. I'm head of the School of Arts, Media and Communication. I'm also Professor of Renaissance English Literature. And it gives me, enormous pleasure to open this British Academy lecture, which will be delivered by Professor Kathryn Rudy, who is Bishop Wardlaw Professor of Art History at the University of St Andrews. As an institution, we are deeply proud of our relationship with the British Academy and share in their mission to promote the value and impact of the arts, humanities and social sciences scholarship nationally and internationally. Our research excellence in the arts and humanities and social sciences research routinely receives national and international attention. Recent highlights include cracking the Dickens Code, exploring the colonial histories of National Trust properties, and of course the discovery of the remains of a certain king under a certain car park, which we're contractually obliged to mention still. A key priority of our approach is emphasising the wider relevance of our scholarship. We recently launched the Heritage Hub in partnership with civic bodies to strengthen this work. Since 2008, we have hosted Literary Leicester, the university's annual free book festival, open to all. Up to 5,000 attendees join us each year to participate in events with Booker Prize winners, celebrated cultural commentators, novelists, poets, historians, biographers, and much more. And it's in this spirit of public communication that we are delighted to have been selected as one of 12 institutions nationally to partner with the British Academy to deliver their flagship lecture programme. Delivered by the most outstanding academics, such as Professor Rudy, the programme showcases the very best scholarship in the arts, humanities and social sciences in the UK and beyond. Before I pass over to Dr. Ben Parsons, who will formally introduce the speaker, a couple of housekeeping announcements to make. The first is that there are no planned fire alarms, so let's hope. Secondly, there are toilets located at the end of the corridor out there on this floor of the building. And please do stay for a reception drink that will follow the lecture. I sincerely hope you enjoy the evening's proceedings.
Thank you, Mary-Ann. As Mary-Ann's already mentioned, I'm Dr. Ben Parsons. I'm Associate Professor, also based in the School of Arts, Media and Communications. I'll just say a few words about the British Academy itself before I move on to introduce our speaker. So the British Academy is the UK's national academy for the humanities and social sciences. It mobilises these disciplines to understand the world and shape a brighter future. It is an independent fellowship of world-leading scholars, a funding body for research and a forum for debate. Held in partnership with universities across the UK, the Academy's lecture programme, curated by its fellows, showcases the very best scholarship in the humanities and social sciences, stimulates debate and reflects the breadth of these subjects and academic perspectives within them. This event is part of the Aspects of Art, the Henriette Hertz Fund series. The fund supported lectures on philosophy, art and its relation to culture, and distinguished individuals, and these series, launched between 1914 and 1916, remain important parts of the Academy's programme today. So, it is my very great pleasure to introduce our British Academy lecturer tonight, Professor Kathryn Rudy. Professor Rudy, as Mary-Ann's already mentioned, is Bishop Wardlaw Professor of Art History at the University of St Andrews, having completed her education at Cornell, Columbia and Toronto, and undertaken postdoctoral positions at the Universities of Utrecht, Washington and Oregon, the Warburg and Courtauld Institutes, and at the Royal Library of the Netherlands, where she was curator of illuminated manuscripts. In the midst of all that, she also found time to work as an omelette cook, housekeeper, slide labourer, and house painter, albeit one restricted to the lower stories of buildings by a chronic fear of heights. She is the author of 8 books to date, each drawing on her copious and wide-ranging expertise in medieval material culture and showcasing her uncanny ability to make books and documents disclose more about their worlds and the interior worlds of their readers and makers than the crude scrawl on their pages. Her first book, published in 2015, was Postcards on Parchment, The Social Lives of Medieval Books, a work which, in the careful, often painstaking attention it pays to the seemingly ephemeral and disposable images left in medieval volumes, provides a lively, sometimes moving account of the ways in which medieval people interacted with one another and with their books. Postcards was followed in formidably quick succession by Piety in Pieces in 2016, Rubrics, Images and Indulgences in 2017, and Image, Knife and Glue Pot in 2019, all beautifully written and illustrated. The last of these shows her commitment to modern as well as medieval technologies of information exchange, being her first book to be made available online on a purely open access basis. So there's no excuse for not reading it after the talk. Her most recent work is the monumentally ambitious 4-volume Touching Parchment, How Medieval Users Rubbed, Handled and Kissed Their Manuscripts, the first 2 volumes of which were published in 2023 and 2024, and which, as a whole, is shaping up to be a major milestone for our understanding about the varied approaches and uses to which readers put their texts, and the myriad ways in which texts preserve traces of their readers' values and gestures. Her work has attracted an equally impressive string of official honours. In 2019, she was elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Scotland's National Academy, and won the Sir Walter Scott Prize for Humanities and Social Sciences in Scotland. Needless to say, we are delighted to welcome Professor Rudy for what promises to be a truly riveting lecture and the auditory equivalent of a page-turner.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Ben. It's great to be here in Leicester. It's my first time here. Fantastic. You've been looking at this image now for a few minutes. Does it make you want to moisturize? Possibly. The rapid succession of books happens because I had won a little pot of money from the German aerospace industry, and I couldn't believe this email when I got it, and I thought it was spam, and so I deleted it, and it kept coming back, and it was real. And they had me come out to Weimar and live in Kandinsky's house and stuff. And with the money, instead of doing something sensible, I hired a personal chef to make all my meals for 2 years. And that allowed me to just write every day for hours and hours without having to cook or clean or shop. It was the best thing I've ever done. Sorry, do you mind if I go off on a tangent? Actually, hiring the personal chef, to put an ad in the paper and have prospective chefs show up on a certain date with a salad as a kind of interview. I had to show up, but this is the test. It was a salad test. I recommend this. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about these objects that I've been thinking about for a long time. This is part of the 3rd volume of the Touching Parchment 4-volume set. And the 3rd volume is all about devotional books and what people did with their prayer books and books of hours and psalters and things like that in the late Middle Ages, from about 1320 until, well, it all falls apart with the printing industry. So until about 1550 or so. And I want to start by looking at some even more crusty pictures here. These images of the face of Christ, they belonged to one of the most powerful figures in late medieval Europe, and that was Philip the Good. Now, you can see, though, that they're quite amateur, and their status as amateur products seems really inconsistent with the expensive, highly crafted kinds of objects that you might associate with the Burgundian dukes. These images are painted on very thick parchment with very thick paint and large areas of unmodulated color. And two of the features really that are really quite unexpected, they really beg interpretation. And first of all, notice how filthy they are at the bottom. So you get the caked on dirt on the white part of the page down here below. And then secondly, the way that the faces have been scraped away. And so those are some of the features of these images that I will be discussing today. So in this talk, I'm going to revisit an article I wrote in 2018 in which I argued that Philip the Good used these images by scraping the paint in order to ingest it, to eat it, for medicinal effects. And now I want to take that argument a step further to suggest that painters who made these small Veronicas, Vera icon, meaning the true image of Christ, they chose their materials in anticipation that the objects would be scraped in this way. The paintings, in other words, were designed to be consumed. And by scraping the images in this way, Philip was fulfilling their function. Now, to think about these operations that these little Veronica images afforded, I will consider this thick paint alongside another material, very important in the late Middle Ages, that was also consumed, namely the Eucharist. And they play material-specific roles within late medieval manuscripts. Now, in one strand of my story, I will employ useware analysis, or borrowed from archaeology, to reveal Philip's gestures. How did he interact with his books as he sought to cumulatively damage these images and the book as a whole? And I think that he was doing that partly to chart his fervor of his devotions as he interacted with his books. And secondly, in today's talk, I hope to show that Philip's gestures were not at all isolated, but rather he formed a community with other book users, and those book users were in convents, and they were in the urban laity, and they were other members at court as well. And so these kinds of book handling practices were spread out socially and economically. Now, closely considering the surfaces here and similar Veronicas to these reveals aspects of their production and their use. All right, now to turn to Philip the Good himself. Actually, could we bring the lights down just a little bit so these images are even sharper and more colorful? Now, Philip the Good, he was publicly and privately quite devout. How does that feel? Do you like that light level? Is that good? Oh yeah, they really pop now. Now, Philip the Good is, I have a pointer here. Oh yeah. So he always wears black. So he alone can wear black. Black is more difficult to dye than all the other colors because you have to dip it multiple times. It involves more labor, more materials, more expensive materials to dye black fabric. And so he has reserved the right for these black outfits for himself. And he's very much publicly on display here as he is showing his devotions. He's kneeling in front at a prie-dieu, in front of a book and a diptych here on the wall. And his territory is quite vast, which meant that he traveled from one place to another and then set up these tent-like structures inside whatever the local church was in order to give himself some privacy. But in the act of giving himself privacy, he's also putting himself very much on display. A big, flashy, colorful display of textiles wherever he goes. And so he's traveling from town to town and erected these temporary chapels such as this. And several of his prayer books survive. So he owned not one, but at least 6. Now, given the time constraints, I want to just focus on a couple of these, 2 of them in particular. And I want to say or argue that he's very much physically interacting with his prayer books, and we can see that in the record of the cumulative wear that he has left behind. And he's depositing fragments of his travels around his territories, as well as fragments of his own body into his books. Notice also that the way that he's on display here means that here's somebody peeking in. He's got members of his retinue watching him. And so the idea of private devotion, I think, is something we should complicate, and to think about maybe semi-public devotion, or devotion where somebody is with a book but maybe on display to other people. And that is, I think, what we're seeing here. Now, this is the first book I want to make an argument about in terms of dirt and signs of wear and so forth. These folios are in a prayer book he used most in the later part of his life. This was a huge volume that he had inherited from his grandfather and namesake, Philip the Bold, who was big in the 1390s. So the first campaign of work in this book is much earlier, from the 1370s, and those 1370s sections are at the top. And then he inherits this book by and by, and he takes it apart, and Philip the Good takes it apart and then adds lots of stuff to it. And you can see in the lower tier here are some of the folios that he has added to this manuscript. And they tried to make it look like the original bits, but you can tell there's different kinds of script, slightly different decoration styles and so forth. And Anne Van Puren has shown that Philip the Good dismantled it in this particular way before adding lots of more prayers and images, including images depicting himself, again, in black right here. So this book then became so big that it just burst out of its binding, and it had to be rebound in 2 volumes, one of which is in Cambridge at the Fitzwilliam, and one of which is in Brussels. And so some of the images like these are in Cambridge. They cost so much. I had to get a second part-time job just to pay for these images, so I hope you appreciate them. And fortunately, the really scraped ones, where I had to photograph them a lot, are in Brussels, where they will let you photograph anything with your camera for days. And so I lucked out with that one. But just as a side note, if you're an art historian, you have to sort of pay attention to where objects are, because if an object is in a collection that won't let you photograph, or is in a collection where you can't afford the photographs, then you have to work on a different project until you get the funding. So that was a side note. All right, so the themes in his manuscript are a bit unusual. And I want to think about these signs of wear. You can see how grubby this is, especially at the bottom. And so these are signs that he has used this particular prayer to St. Martha quite a lot in the original section. And he's added things as well, such as this quite incredible image of St. Eligius. And whereas you might know this St. Eligius, who is the patron of goldsmiths and features in this painting by Petrus Christus as the patron of goldsmiths, who was really big in Bruges, which was a center for goldsmithery. Eligius was also an ironmonger, and when he wasn't monging iron, he was also a farrier. And his big claim to fame is that he could take the leg off of the horse and then put the shoe on and then stick the whole leg back on, and it really saves the back muscles. So there you go. He's got my vote for sanctity. These parchment singletons, however, have another story to tell besides their grubbiness, and that has to do with the little holes that you see. Here, you see those holes? And here. And these are offsets from pilgrims' badges. As he was traveling around the area under his control, he would visit all the pilgrimage shrines and pick up the badges that were available from those shrines in order to sew them in. And so we might find a badge such as this Saint Martha, which fits quite neatly into that spot, which would be sewn in with needle and thread. And where there wasn't a suffrage, a prayer to a saint, available for a particular pilgrimage shrine, that's when he added the leaf so that it could then receive this token. And a lot of tokens, they look like this. These are pilgrims' badges, usually made out of lead tin. They're molded, either made on two sides or pressed on one side, but you can see the variety of the shapes, and they usually refer to various martyred saints. Here, for example, here's the Tau cross for St. Anthony, and each of those hooks is a breast. So here we have St. Agatha with her breast. It's really quite abstract. I mean, abstraction in the late Middle Ages is a good topic somebody should write a PhD about. But most of these badges I'm showing you here have weird contours. They are shaped like the standing saints, or shaped, like the breast one I just showed you. And very few of them are round, such as this one here. And that becomes important because those are just one category of thing that Philip the Good added to his book, and we'll see those arise again in a few minutes. But the other category of objects that he added to his book in quite large numbers were these small images of the Vera icon, the Veronica images. And these are on successive pages of his book, and he's sewn them in, and I will discuss those presently. But first, I want to make an argument about the way that he used his second prayer book. And this is a really spectacular binding. This is a diptych binding, where you open this thing, this is the outside of the binding, you open it up, and it opens into something that is a diptych on the top, and it stays the same, and then you can turn the pages below, and so you have this these two images of the crucifixion and the coronation sort of present all the time while you are reading the book below. And you can see here, once again, that Philip has had an image of himself as he's kneeling in veneration to the Virgin of the Corn, where she's in a blue mantle that's covered in images of grain. And this is such an unusual manuscript, and I think that this is the manuscript that he used when he was collecting a particular kind of small badge. These are the back folio and the front fly leaf of this particular manuscript, and you can see that there are dozens of these round offsets that have been sewn onto these pages. And namely, these offsets are all round, whereas the badges with the saints are all these different shapes. And what I think is happening here is that the round ones actually don't represent saints at all, but represent the Eucharist. And this small percentage of round badges that survive, they look like this, and they have broadly Eucharistic themes, such as the pelican piercing its own breast, or the IHS monogram, or the Lamb of God at the top, or there's several of them with the Lamb of God. And so these are all related to the blood of Christ or to the Eucharist, and not a single one of them can be connected to a particular shrine. And so the bulk of these that are round are Christological in nature, and I believe that they actually are tokens of having taken the Eucharist, because the maybe frustrating thing for a late medieval believer who ate the Eucharist was that the thing disappears. You ingest it, and there's no sign of having done so. And so these little round tokens were available for people who had done that. And what late medieval believers do is then sew them into their manuscripts. And I inventoried over 50 late medieval prayer books that have these round offsets, and found that these are often sewn onto folios that relate to Eucharistic piety, such as this little Dutch Book of Hours. And you can see that indeed this round offset is here, and the text here reads, what does it say? Een goed gebed van den Heiligen Sacrament, so a good prayer for the Holy Sacrament. And so what was formerly there is one of these round badges, and also another one sewn onto the letter, the initial itself. So the Eucharist then added to the prayer about the Eucharist. And other manuscripts that have these kinds of round badges sewn onto them include this Annunciation image in the Catharina convent in Utrecht, where you can see that somebody has added the body of Christ to the page with the incarnation, which makes a kind of sense. Or this manuscript that has a fake date of 1387, it's actually mid-15th century, and here's somebody who just went and got the Eucharist everywhere that they possibly could, and collected all of these metal badges and sewed in, I counted 48 of them. That page must have been really heavy with all that metal sewn to it, clanking about. So they collected these on their prayer books, either on the fly leaves or on prayers that were relevant to them. And Philip the Good did the same thing, and he's arranged them very neatly in rows, sort of starting at the top and going in rows, like eating an ear of corn, and then filled up this page and had to go to the next flyleaf, and then he died, and so he didn't fill in anymore. So we can see how many of these masses he went to. So Philip did the same, but less chaotically than this owner did. But I want to just impress upon you that taking the Eucharist was this object that was designed to be ingested and fragmented within the body, that believers longed to have this token, this reminder or souvenir of having had this experience, and therefore resorted to sort of damaging their books and sewing these in. Now, the other place where Philip sewed these round Eucharistic badges in was at this particular image, which is in the big prayer book, now divided between the Fitzwilliam and Brussels. And you can see here that there are numerous of these circles. I call this a negative dirt circle, where a badge has been sewn in here, and then he has used the book, and that the dirt has then not been able to penetrate where that round badge was, and we just get dirt all around, except for where the badge was. And it's as if he's putting the Eucharist back onto the incarnation again, onto the image of the infant Jesus suckling from his mother's breast. Now, one of the problems that all art historians have is that the professional photographs, such as this one, flatten all images out and also make it impossible to know what the scale of this book is. And so it's much better often to have homemade amateur photography, such as this, that has my actual finger in it, and that puts the human back into the human relationship with the folios, so you can get a sense of scale. And furthermore, you can see that this is very much a three-dimensional object and that it's highly interactive, and that when I show you this from the side here, that this folio with the Virgin and Child was on extremely thin parchment. So as soon as he sewed a couple of these metal badges on, it wasn't strong enough to hold that metal. And so he had to put some paper backing on it, like a reinforcement, in order to make it stiff enough to hold up to the task of carrying these metal badges. You can also see that they have made an offset on the other side of the page here, where the metal has dug into that organic, soft, leathery parchment, which is, of course, made out of animal skin. So this is an object that then Philip had to adapt slightly so that he could use it in this way more interactively. Now, so you can see again that dirt defines the edges of these badges, and indicating that the badges had been there and they removed at some other point. But why did they get so filthy? And this is really the interesting bit. Is why they get so filthy? I think it's because Philip is reaching his face into the book in order to kiss these images, to kiss this book over and over again. And when he does so, I mean, he's got the book maybe at a prie-dieu, like the one we saw in the image, and he's reaching his whole face in, and the bottom third of the book gets the grease from his chin, the bits of his razor stubble, part of his lunch. And so the bottom 2/5 of the book, both sides of this opening here, are encrusted with his facial oils. And the book, the dirt has not reached the gutter where his chin wasn't that pointy, didn't penetrate into the gutter, and it doesn't penetrate across the metal badges. So, and it's the image of Christ's bottom, really, his naked bottom, which is receiving the brunt of all of this kissing. And wow, I didn't think of that before. Don't think about that too much. So this is all consistent with the user, Philip the Good, putting his face in the book and kissing it over and over again. And the dark stain then going on to the Christ body. But what's really important here is to know is that this prayer is a prayer for strength of the flesh, to maintain one's flesh. But it hasn't really worked. Philip the Good had 27 out-of-wedlock children, and so he was very devoted to this prayer, but it failed him at least 27 times. So sins against the flesh, or sins of the flesh, was not his strong suit. Now, Philip handled that opening with the body of Christ in that very physical way, but he also handled the openings with the added Veronicas in a similar way. And again, amateur handheld photography can better show what that relationship between the body and the book really is. And the fact that there are 4 folios in a row that all have the images of the Veronica. So he's put them all together in one place in the manuscript. Now, I want to point out that we know what kiss prints look like in books, and that's knowable in part because a missal, which is the book that a priest uses to conduct the Mass, and I'm showing you here an example of the canon page in a missal, would be kissed after the 13th century, so in our period here, by the priest who would place his face into the book and kiss the image. But beginning in the early 13th century or so, illuminators realized that all this kissing would really wreck the image, and you can see how messed up the pigments are and so forth. And so illuminators began making what I call an oscillatory target, a kiss target, at the bottom of the page, so that the priest would aim his lips there and thereby prevent damaging the miniature. But as you can see from this example, priests didn't want to be limited to that one little area, kiss at the cross, but their lips strayed all the way up the vertical of the cross and concentrated on the torso of Christ and wiped part of his torso across the landscape. And you can see that those lip prints also bring some grease, so facial grease and oils, but also some moisture. So there's hydrophobic and hydrophilic moisture from the face that ends up on the book, and it has different effects. So you can imagine those lips and that face entering this book, and again, getting the bottom 2/5 of it really quite filthy over and over again, to the point where the white cloth of Veronica that she was said to have held as Christ walked to Calvary is completely sullied with that dirt. And in this close-up here, in the gutter, I want you to notice two things. One is that these Veronica images are painted on extremely thick parchment. And the second thing is that they are painted on with really thick paint. You see how that paint is so thick that it's gobbed up. You can see the brush strokes. It almost looks like, I don't know, an early 20th century German painting, expressionist painting with the swirls of paint in Christ's face. But look here as well, that parchment is so thick that as Philip put his face in the book and withdrew it over and over again, that it scraped across his face, and big amounts of oil got stuck on the edge of the parchment. And next to the big dirty bit, there's a canal where his facial dirt couldn't reach. So this is an explanation for how this book got to be so dirty in this particular way. So these stiff edges scraping Philip's face. Oh, here and here again. Okay, but as a final action, these images, which Philip was so desperate to get his face next to, they are then scraped, but scraped in a very particular way. And I think that they were scraped purposefully and in order to avoid the eyes, because as you might know, iconoclasm is partly about attacking a figure and first attacking the eyes so that it can't see out. It loses its power, it's being denatured. But in this case, the image has been scraped, so it's the forehead and nose that gets scraped first without having those eyes sort of pitted out. Having said that, here's an example where the eyes are scraped out. But I want to show you this because it is evidence about how this kind of scraping would have occurred in a hospital setting. This image is very large, and it's now pasted into the front cover of a manuscript that was in the St. John's Hospital in Bruges for hundreds of years. In fact, it just left the Bruges Hospital in about 2019. It's gone missing, actually, which is, I think I know where it is. I don't have it, but that's another story. It's going to involve nuns and priests and a car, and it's a big mystery, and the mayor of Bruges is on it, and I am too, and we're going to get this thing back. But for the meantime, I'll just tell you about it. And this giant image of the face of Christ is in this lectionary, which it has nothing to do with, and I think it was placed there as just a place to keep it safe. And you can see that it's not the first storage solution because it's been folded. You see the fold mark here. So somebody had folded it and it was stuck somewhere else before it was inserted into the front cover of this lectionary. And you can also notice that it's too large for this lectionary. The edges are sticking out over here. It also has some holes at the top, And according to a description of it from the early 20th century, it has 20th century pins stuck into it. And I think that it was actually tacked onto a wall or in somewhere semi-public in the St. Johannes hospital in Bruges and used as medicine. So the face can be scraped and the medicine can be given to patients. And that idea, I think, of using something that is both iconic and also having the status of a relic, since the Veronica is both icon and relic, not unlike this little object, which is a different kind of pilgrim's token. This is a 5th century Syrian clay token that represents Saint Simon the Stylite sitter. And you can see that Simon is here. This is the column. He's sitting on top of a column where he sat. He was one of the pillar sitters of the 5th century, and he sat there for 20 years. And so these are called the Bufferin of Byzantium, and according to his Vita, they'd be crushed and drunk in a glass of water by users. So swallowing images like this has a long history. And they could do that because these were only desiccated, lightly baked, not fully fired. And so one scenario that's consistent with this pattern is that this was Philip's beloved book. He used it for decades, and then when he lay on his deathbed in 1467 with pneumonia, having difficulty breathing, he had one of his PA come and scrape this paint so that he could ingest it and bring this beloved image into his own body. But he died at the age of 69 with this book, and it was closed, and I think it wasn't used again, and it became something of a relic of him, and was not used as a devotional book by anyone else. But we can see that this idea of having very thickly painted images of the Veronica is something that actually occurs in at least 50 examples, only a couple of which I'll show you here. So, for example, this very thick face of Christ that's stuck into a manuscript now in Paris, or this one from Wienhausen that is painted on leather. Again, the leather is, I think, purposeful, that it can withstand lots of scraping. I thought about bringing lottery tickets for all of you so you could scrape them. And I think it's part of the same aesthetic of the process of scraping this thing off, designed to be scraped off, and this that people are doing it as they are supposed to be doing it. This instructions in German say, kiss this 5 times. It doesn't say scrape it, but it does say kiss it, which implies bringing it to the mouth and ingesting it. And the pattern is really clear that of the dozens of these that I've run around photographing for the last 20 years, the large majority has been damaged in this particular way, this purposeful scraping, and not part of iconoclasm, but part of the ultimate iconophilia or iconophagia, the eating of images. And it is also possible that the paint itself, this black paint, would have had a medicinal ingredient. So we know from lapidaries that particular kinds of soil or minerals, there's a variety that can be ingested and that are black. And I'm not sure exactly which one is used, but I think that same kind of paint might be what is making this nail of Christ black, and also making it this very thick paint that just wants to crumble away and launch itself from the surface of the parchment. So these scraped nails are few and far between, but I want to do some more research on this particular image to see if, in fact, there are some signs of scraping below. But this also explains why the image that you saw at the very beginning has been scraped in this particular way, why the paint is already flaking off. It's because it has been designed to do just that, to dislodge from its substrate so that the image could fulfill its role. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you don't get too itchy.
I'm comparing, so we'll have to switch the microphone between us, I think. But, well, thank you very much, Kate, for that excellent talk. I'm sure it's stimulated a lot of questions from the floor. So we have a good 15 minutes, perhaps even 20 minutes now, if anyone does want to raise any questions with our speaker at all.
I mean,
hands going up.
I wish you were smiling. I wish you were in all my lectures. But you should never play poker.
So I think we have some questions at the back.
Questions at the back.
You said about it was medicinal, because I was going to ask you, was it poisonous? Did it have something? Because how would they know that it was medicinal? Because I thought it might be poisonous.
Right, just like Name of the Rose. Exactly, Name of the Rose. So, yeah, I don't recommend doing this at home. It definitely has lead in it.
Yeah.
Heavy metals all over the place. But this is a period when people are making makeup out of lead white paint, and it's pockmarking their skin, and they should be noticing it, but they're not. So the division between what's medicinal and what is poisonous is a thin and vague line. But I think you might enjoy reading lapidary texts. There are a couple in translation that you might enjoy reading. And so lapidaries are books of rocks, and they cover all kinds of, I'm not a geologist, but every kind of rock you can imagine. And its function, including its medicinal function, and how to use it, sometimes as a poultice, sometimes ingested. But I would say a good 20% of the items in most lapidaries will have recipes for ingesting in some way, and with their medicinal benefits enumerated.
Okay. Any other hands going up at all?
Thank you very much. My question is pertaining to his specific role, Philip the Good. What was his specific role in the liturgy of the church as of then? I think that should be a Catholic church, because that's or an Orthodox church anyway, that has that practice. Did he have any specific role why he was always present in the setting?
Right, yes.
Yeah.
So we're deep in Catholic territory here. So Protestant Reformation, it's still in the future, and he's in Burgundy, so Western Europe. So Catholic Church, he doesn't really play a role in the liturgy other than to be very close to the altar and being very present and visible. I think visibility is his main job, and demonstrating piety to his subjects, I would say. So he's not a priest, he's not a cleric, he doesn't have a tonsure, he's not performing, he's not reading from a missal. He is there as a audience member, front and center, and very, very present, and trying to make himself quite big. And also visiting a lot of shrines along the way. Good?
Okay. Any further? Yep.
I'm curious about what happened later. I mean, you're talking about early 15th century Burgundy, but if you think of Philip's successors in the Valois line in France, I mean, did people like Francis I go in for this sort of thing? How long does it last? I mean, I can see that kings are still kissing Bibles at their coronations, but this kind of thing seems quite specific. And what can you say about the aftermath?
Right, good question. So what the aftermath, I think that the problem is that printing comes in, and then people aren't as physical with printed books. And it's partly because they're not painted. It's partly because if they are painted, it's in wash and not in this thick paint. And it's partly because the paper itself is friable and it disintegrates with moisture and so forth. It doesn't hold up to what parchment can hold up to. And so I think that change in material really changes the gesture. That said, there's still a lot of image eating that takes place, and there is this wonderful sheet of 18th century German crucifixions that are about an inch tall, and they're printed on paper that's designed to be ingested. And so that continues in the printed era, but in a slightly different way.
So, I had two thoughts. The first one was it would be quite interesting to get one of those sort of handheld X-ray spectrograms and shine them at some of these images to actually understand a bit more about what they were made of, that might give you clues into why they thought they might be good for them. And the other one was more a question about most of the tokens and things that were sewn in have gone. Do you have any understanding as to why they went? Was it Reformation related? Did somebody else look at them and think, oh, I could reuse that lead and melt it down into something else?
Two good questions. So the first one, so the spectrograph question. So I thought about this. I use science quite a bit. I use images or technology when I need to, and RTI and so forth. But I try to resist using a machine that goes ping if it costs several hundreds of thousands of pounds, when an answer can be gleaned by close looking. So I was in the Books to Beast project for a while, which does zooms analysis to using pencil shavings, pencil eraser, taking a bit of the material from parchment in order to figure out what kind of an animal it is. But I think after handling a few thousand manuscripts, I know what a sheep parchment feels like and smells like, and what a cow parchment feels like and smells like. And so I'd like to give more credence to what, as humanists, we can actually observe, and only use big machines when necessary, when there's a really specific humanities-oriented research question. And
there were so few machines that went ping in the Middle Ages, right. So it's not a kind of authentic sense of how they engaged.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
And the question of what exactly is the material, I think it doesn't matter that much, because what matters is what did people think it was, and we can see what they thought it was by the effects of their behavior. And so if they are scraping it, they're doing it because they think it's medicinal. And so it doesn't actually matter whether it's made out of lead or tin or just black gunge.
Yeah.
But what matters is that there is a behavior and there's black paint, and we can see the result of that. But maybe there might be other people who feel differently and want to do more science-oriented projects. I also want to see less funding go to machines and more funding go to just the eye in the hand.
Yeah.
But and so what was the other question?
Why did they get removed?
Oh, why did it get? So okay, where did you go? So I blame everything on the 19th century. When there's anything goes wrong, I blame the 19th century. So overpainting, bad conservation, 19th century. And 19th century also responsible for this Cartesian idea that the manuscripts have to go in one part of the library, that the prints have to go to a different part of the library, and any manuscript that has prints in it has to be cut apart so that they can go to their respective parts of the library. And anything that looks like a record from a church needs to go to an archive, and anything that looks more booky can go, not booky, bookish. Booky is something else. Bookish.
Yeah.
Bookish. Okay, it goes to the library, not the archive. And so I think this 19th century habit of hard and fast categorization, like they took Descartes and they put Descartes before Deshorst.
I feel like we're almost climaxed at that, so we should probably end there. But no, any further questions? I think Chris, did you have a question?
Yes, I sometimes give talks about medieval daily life, and always a question that comes up is, did they wash? The assumption is that medieval people were all living in a sort of life of filth and squalor, and my response is always, of course they did. I mean, for example, peasant households are often equipped with a basin and ewer and a towel, so there's obviously washing going on. and I'm a bit worried about the grime in the Duke of Burgundy's household. Have you any views about cleanliness?
I just passed a few restaurants on my way here. It's always disconcerting when there's the hygiene rating. If it's lower than 3, I get kind of itchy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would give Duke of Burgundy a hygiene rating of 2. But I think there are 2 schools of thought about cleanliness. One that says, oh, there are images of the midwife bathing the Mary or bathing Christ. Lots of bath pictures. On the other hand, there are kinds of underwear that you have to be sewn into once a season. And so I think you could make a case either way. And it might be there's probably a stratified answer to that.
Thank you. This sort of relates to the last question. Is Philip the greasiest medieval reader that you've encountered, or have you found muckier manuscripts?
Oh, yeah. I love that question. Philip is the greasiest. Philip is the greasiest. Oh, okay, but there is one. Do I have a picture of it? Let's see here. I have several hundred more pictures. There's people who just kiss the initials, people who kiss the entire enunciation, pretty mucky, but that's not greasy face, that's just intense saliva. We've got, how much muckier can we get? That's pretty mucky. That's, I think, there's grease, which doesn't move the paint because the paint is water soluble. And saliva reconstitutes the paint because it is water soluble. And so if you've got gobs of paint that migrate to the other side, that means saliva. But this one is pretty good. This is in Cambridge. And here is intense kissing with a lot of grease, and it's gone through the page. And so that is oil that seeps through the lipidic, so lipid-oriented parchment, which is fatty, and not water-based. So that might be the muckiest, most enthusiastic, cheeseburger-munching. God, I could go for a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but there's one other enthusiast. I hope everybody feels safe in this crowd to ask
Safe
a
from
question.
saliva and grease.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to ask about gender, because sometimes
Ginger?
not ginger, next, but just with gender, because sometimes we can know if a book is owned by a man or a woman, and I wondered, are the women kissing the same things? Are women allowed to kiss the face of Christ, or do they kiss different images? Or can you get any signs if you can identify who the owner is, if they're allowed to kiss the same things or not?
Well, that's a good question. So, gender of kissing. I have 500,000 images. So these are all priests. Priest. I thought I had a good one where you could see, here it is. Okay, this priest. And here you can see the whiskers. You can see that he's got a fairly thick beard, so when he's touching down, he might have a facial arrangement like you. And I wouldn't do this to a manuscript because it's going to end up looking like that. So that's the only gendered kind of thing I can say about patterns of wear and grease and stuff. I don't know if we can do DNA analysis because it's going to be so mucked up. There'll be layers of all the DNA of every curator, every person who's ever passed through it, or opened that book. So I don't think it would make sense to do that. But as far as I can tell, women and men are kissing more or less the same things, minus men who just have the priesthood and therefore get the big crucifixion. But that's a good question.
Any further questions? I had a question.
Oh.
I mean, given what we talked about earlier, the way that images often get changed deliberately from their original image into another image in order to kind of signify something else, is there some kind of possibly kind of exhibitionism going on with this? Like people deliberately ruining their manuscripts to show us how pious they are?
I'm sure that must be it. Let's see.
So look how often I've kissed this.
Look, exactly. And also, if you're leaving your book to posterity, if you're leaving it to kids and grandkids, then you can prove just how pious you were by having something that's this mucked up. I mean, I think these are interesting because they're related to a rosary devotion, and where instead of having rosary beads, you touch these initials as if they were beads. And I haven't touched this myself because my inner curator just stops me. But the gold letters themselves, they're raised with gesso, so that I'm sure that it cradles the finger, makes a little cup for it, little like a typewriter keyboard, makes a little cup for your finger. And so they're inviting this kind of interaction. And indeed, I'm not sure the gender of this owner either, but that there are lots of different kinds of manuscripts that are then designed for this intense interaction, and that to do it right, you really leave your mark. Zorro was definitely here and on his knees.
So like the images are almost designed to be destroyed.
Yes, if you're doing it right. Yeah, like the Eucharist is designed to be.
A stamp is designed to be licked or.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah. How extraordinary. So you further question over at the front.
My fantasy is that everybody asks a question. Or actually, my fantasy is that some aspect of this is useful in your own work. If you work with objects, is that your case?
Always.
Great.
You. Thank you for your fantastic lecture. My question kind of bookends an earlier question, which is how long were medieval manuscripts kissed from, say, the early Middle Ages onwards, or does it intensify in the later Middle Ages, or do you have a sense of that? It must be difficult because you can't necessarily, you don't have sedimentary layers of that, that you can examine. But I don't know if you've come across more of this in later, and it's also complicated by the rise of the production of private manuscripts, devotional manuscripts, I guess. But I wondered if there is a sort of long history of kissing and scraping devotional images in manuscripts, and if manuscripts were made to be tougher for this reason.
Oh, great. So I don't work on very early things, but surprisingly enough, some of the most kissed things are English and 14th century. I can just imagine 14th century English people being really robustly physical.
There's not really enough Chaucer in his comments on kissing.
That's true. Exactly. And I also think that the most intense period of interacting with the book is when it's new. So the person for whom it was made would be the most invested in the particular texts and images that it has. And then whoever inherits it knows that person and might be 80% as invested. And then after that person's living memory is gone, then it just becomes a really mucky book and kind of gross. And so that it has utility value when it's brand new, and after a generation, its utility value falls, and what increases then is its value as an heirloom or keepsake. And so its museum value rises and its utility falls to the point where it goes into a museum collection and it has no utility whatsoever. It can just sit behind glass. And so I think that if you were to find some earlier medieval things, that you could make a case that, this is why we have the subjunctive though too, so it could be that, that use comes from its first set of owners. Do you have something in mind?
Okay, I think, even though we could obviously keep Kate here all night, that would be very rude to do that to you. No pun intended on your name, obviously. But so it just leaves me to thank Kate for a wonderful lecture, and to thank the British Academy, of course, for supporting this event, and also to thank you for attending. And we do have refreshments over in room 204, which you'll be escorted to if you'd like to join us. But again, I think primarily, I just reiterate my thanks to Kate for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.